Good morning, everyone. It is now 9 o'clock, and so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm glad that you're joining us for the fifth ESOL Program Guidance webinar on Exiting Monitoring Students, Meaningful Communication with LEP Parents, and Program Evaluation. On the screen, obviously, if you're logged in, you found the way to log in, but on that screen as well, there should be a handout. I'm not sure if it got posted, so if it did not, let me know and I can email it to Kathy Swan, who is, I think, joining us as well on the technology end. So just let me know if it's there or not there.
Tricia, this is Sherry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It is posted.
Okay.
And I'll be monitoring today instead of Kathy.
Okay, thank you. Just looks like Kathy's name, so.
It is. I'm on her account.
Sounds good. Glad you're with us.
Okay.
We are recording today's webinar as we have the others. The others are all now posted with the PowerPoint on the English Learners webpage. Today we also have Miguel Hernandez and Alan Lytle with us. Miguel, are you there?
Yes, good morning. I'm here.
Okay, good morning. And Alan, are you there?
Yep, good morning.
Okay. They will be helping monitor the Q&A box that you can access on your screen. As you go through the presentation today, if you have questions, please submit them there, and we will do our best to either answer them live or later by email. I have been compiling all of the questions, and we'll be putting together a final Q&A, frequently asked questions, after this webinar, and we'll post that along with the webinar recordings and handouts on the English Learners webpage. So let's get going because we have a lot to talk about today. And that is the wrong agenda, but it is the right handout. I will fix that before I post it on the ADE website. All the information in today's session is based on the Programs for English Language Learners that was developed by OCR, the Office for Civil Rights, and on the January 7th, 2015 Dear Colleague letter that was jointly issued by the Civil Rights Office with the U.S. Department of Education as well as the Department of Justice. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about today is about monitoring English learners. LEAs, which are school districts, must monitor the progress of all English learners in achieving English language proficiency and in acquiring content knowledge. All districts should have rigorous monitoring systems that include benchmarks for expected growth and take appropriate steps to assist students who are not adequately progressing towards those goals. Part of AEE's responsibility is to monitor LEAs to ensure that they are providing English learners meaningful access to grade level core content instruction and remedying any academic deficits in a timely manner. Part of all of this, the monitoring that we're talking about here, occurs in a program evaluation. And I'm aware that the state as well as districts probably need more technical assistance in how to do that. And we are in the process of working with the Intercultural Development Research Association to bring in some training on that, as well as the one of the regional educational laboratories in the South. One thing that you must monitor for is districts must annually assess English language proficiency progress in listening, speaking, reading, and writing using a valid and reliable instrument aligned to state English language proficiency standards. In Arkansas, that's the ELPA 21. You monitor the progress throughout the year in ways that you deem appropriate in each district. That ongoing progress monitoring can help inform instruction in English language development. In addition, English learners must participate in state content assessments. Other webinars address which assessments they participate in. But districts should regularly monitor their progress in content achievement regularly, not just during the state assessments. So just like you're monitoring progress of other students, you need to be monitoring the progress of your English learners to make sure they're progressing as they should be. One way you could do that is to implement response to intervention to provide multi-tiered support to English learners in various areas. But this is not a substitute for a language acquisition program, just having a response to intervention model set up in your district. Regarding exiting English learners from ESOL Services, OCR says that we must use a valid and reliable English language proficiency assessment of all 4 language domains to ensure that all K-12 English learner students have achieved English proficiency, and that this proficiency score must be set at a level that enables students to effectively participate in grade level content instruction in English without ESOL services. OCR says that ADE may include additional objective criteria related to English proficiency to decide if an English learner student who scores proficient on the English language proficiency assessment is ready for exit or requires additional language assistance services. But we can't use these additional criteria as a substitute for a proficient score on a valid and reliable ELP assessment. So currently in Arkansas, the criteria, and I am aware that this is prior to this year, has been to score proficient or 5s on all parts of the LDIP, that core content area grades must be a C or above, and core content includes language arts, mathematics, science, and social studies, that any state content area assessments should be a proficient or above in language arts and math in the 40th percentile or above on the norm reference test portions in language arts and math, and 2 teacher recommendations, which are usually indicated by signing the LPAC exit form that your district uses. A note on the exit criteria: every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, requires that each state has common entry and exit criteria in place by 2017-18. We will be reviewing as a state the exit criteria, partly to account for changes in the assessments used, but also to make sure that we are in alignment with what ESSA requires. We will also be developing common entry criteria, and all of this process will involve stakeholder input. We are working on a timeline for that, but do not have that at this moment. Okay, before we talk about documenting this exit criteria, are there any questions out there? Miguel, are there any questions, or Alan?
Yeah, we have 2 of them. Actually 3. The first one says, what specific types of instructional plans does the ADE suggest for RTI with ELs?
Specific types of instructional plans. I am not sure I understand the question about a type of instructional plan. So if that person would like to clarify that question, that would be helpful. What's
Okay.
another
We'll move
question?
to the second one. And this one you've already partially addressed, but I'm going to ask it again anyway. Are the exit criteria going to be changed? When can we anticipate new criteria? How will this criteria be arrived at? Input from districts, etc.
Okay, we will be reviewing the exit criteria. Obviously, it will be adjusted. I mean, it has to be, because we don't use the ELDA anymore. And the wording in the current criteria is actually tied to our former benchmark assessment. We will be addressing that. that has to be in place, the officially changed exit criteria for the 17-18 school year. However, we will be issuing guidance on how to use the exit criteria for this coming year until we have the final revision ready for 17-18. The criteria will be arrived at by input from stakeholders. Right now, the department is working on a model to get input from stakeholders on many parts of requirements in our state plan for ESSA. So we'll be using a similar setup with that. It will involve, we will get input from districts, et cetera, when setting those exit criteria. We will also be informing the entry and exit criteria by a major project that's been going on with the CCSSO, the Council of Chief State School Officers. Robert Linquante and some others have issued guidance on entry and exit criteria, and the research that is compiled in that will be used to inform our entry and exit criteria. Okay, are there other questions?
Yeah, so this next one is also related to what you just said. It says grades of C and above and the 40th percentile ranking seem to be very low indicators for students. Will these levels be improved on during the review?
We will address those during the review to see what is the best practice for using other criteria in an exit criteria. As far as grades C and above and grade 40th percentile, all that we need to assure is that students are able to perform at a level comparable to non-English learners. And we don't expect all students who are non-English learners to have all A's and B's. Those are your good students. A C tends to be an average score by definition, but we will address it and we will get input from others. I don't have a final answer on that because I do need input from several about that. That's a similar discussion with the 40th percentile.
Okay, then this is the further explanation of the first question, and then we have one other question after this. So the original question was, what specific types of instructional plans does the ADE suggest for RTI with ELs? Then here's the further explanation. Instructional plans for RTI, definition of the amount of minutes, how the student receives services, what type of services. For example, 101 for 60 minutes per week if the student is at level X for a certain number of years. Will there be clear definition of what districts must do for LTELs or SIFEs who fall under RTI?
Okay. For long-term English learners and students with interrupted formal education, for those of you who aren't sure what LTELs and SIFEs are, as well as just recommended minutes and such. ADE will not, at this time, and I don't anticipate a time, that we will actually have recommended minutes of service. You need to find and we can help in this part of trying to find some research-based response to intervention or just research-based interventions for English learners. And then what you need to do is see in that research, how was that intervention conducted? If the intervention was successful because it was done 3 days a week for 30 minutes a day with this level of student, then that's how you should implement it. But it needs to go back to research-based interventions that have proven effective, and you need to implement them the way that the research has said, so that they're implemented with fidelity. We will be working on gathering information about research-based interventions, but that's a great question and a great topic for another training in the future. Okay, we're going to move on now. Thank you for your questions, and please feel free to keep adding questions. Okay, so you had a student who you've decided has met the exit criteria, and the LPAC is the team that decides that. The one thing that you must do is in eSchool, you need to go in and enter their ELL or LEP exit date. That is the date the student met the criteria for fluent English proficient status and was exited from the ESOL LEP program and no longer receives services and is considered a regular education student. And it shows you the format. And then you also need to uncheck the box to the right of the ELL LEP entry date. It's the box between the entry date and the exit date. If you forget to uncheck the box, I believe the system is set up that once you enter an exit date, it automatically unchecks the box. Why do we need an exit date? It helps us determine how long a student received ESOL services. It helps us report accurate enrollment data to the state and federal government agencies, different things that we have to report, to know when monitoring of a former English learner began in your district. And it also triggers the status English language learner field that shows up on various reports from Cognos and eSchool and AppScan to read as in, meaning they're not an English language learner. So remember to uncheck that box next to the ELL LEP entry date, although I do believe it unchecks anyway. Anyways. Then what you have to do is you need to monitor what are now considered former English learners for 2 years. Part of the monitoring is you're ensuring that the students have not been prematurely exited. You're making sure that they can maintain the performance that they were showing at the time of exit. You are also addressing any academic deficits they may have incurred as a result of participation in the English Learner Program and making sure that those are remedied. You're also making sure that they are meaningfully participating in the standard instructional program comparable to their never English learner peers. Part of that, a good process to put in place, is monitor whether they're maintaining the exit criteria. Obviously, they won't keep taking an English language proficiency test while they're in that former English learner monitoring period, but you can continually monitor grades and performance on state assessments or on other locally given assessments that you get. If you see that they cannot maintain the exit criteria levels of performance, then you might want to consider retesting them with a valid and reliable grade-appropriate English language proficiency test to determine if there's a persistent language barrier, and then offer additional language assistance services where needed to meet your civil rights obligations. In no case should retesting of an exited student's English language proficiency be prohibited. If the results of the retesting qualify the student as an English learner, the school district must re-enter the student into English learner status and offer ESOL services. If the student is re-entered into English learner services, school districts should document the bases for the re-entry and the parent's consent to such re-entry. So you're going back to what we've discussed in prior webinars about notifying the parents of placement and such. In order to document monitored former English learner students for the first 2 years, there is a field called Former ELL LEP Monitored that's in eSchoolPLUS. And this is for any student who was exited from ESOL Services and whose academic progress is being monitored for 2 years in the regular education classroom as required by federal law. You will put an M1, which means monitored year 1, for the first year after their exit date. Then if they successfully are performing and continuing as a FEP student, you'll put N2 for monitored year 2 for the second year after the exit date. Then at the end of year 2, you currently will then go and remove M2. It's important that the LPAC annually monitor the progress of your English learners. That's an annual review. It's important that the LPAC exit students who meet exit criteria, and that's usually documented on an exit form. And the LPAC must monitor your former English learners for 2 years, And that will increase to 4 years by 2017-18 with a former EL form or perhaps an adjusted version of your exit form. So when you're being asked to make sure you have documentation of how you monitor and exit, these are the kinds of forms that you need to have for your district in order to successfully document this process. Now here's a monitoring example that OCR provided in their joint letter. Some school districts choose to create forms for their ESOL and content teachers to use to monitor English learner students each quarter. These forms include the students' grades in each subject, scores on district and state assessments and standardized tests, and the teacher's comments on an English learner student's strengths and weaknesses in each of the 4 language domains in each academic subject. When the monitoring form of an intermediate English learner student reflects difficulties in social studies and writing papers, an ESOL teacher suggests sheltering strategies and writing rubrics to the social studies teacher to assist the English learner student. In a way, this is like an RTI type process, but not called RTI. It can be included in that, but it doesn't necessarily have to be included in your RTI. It doesn't mean they're struggling to the point of needing to be in RTI. But if they are having difficulties related to language, then you do need to respond by assisting the student or the teachers working with that student. An exiting example, this is not from Arkansas. I want that to be clear. But school districts throughout a state found that a longitudinal cohort analysis shows that English learner students who completed and exited the ESOL program are not able to meaningfully participate in regular education classes comparable to their never English learner peers. So that state revised its exit criteria for exiting English learner students from ESOL programs to ensure that the criteria are valid and reliable and require proficiency in the 4 domains. The district then provides teachers and staff with training on the revised exit criteria and procedures, and the district takes additional steps to improve the ESOL program services. Mainly give this example to show that the state is responsible for looking at how the exit criteria are working, and if they're not working as they were intended, to adjust them. So when we look at revising the exit criteria by 17-18, we will be doing some analysis of how our current criteria have been working. Some compliance issues that show up with monitoring and exiting. One is that school districts are found to not be in compliance if they exit intermediate and advanced English learner students from ESOL programs and services based on insufficient numbers of teachers who are qualified to deliver the ESOL program. In other words, on that one, it's not okay to say, well, we'll serve the beginning and, advanced beginning students, level 1 and 2 students, maybe our level 3 students, but we're not going to service most of the 3s or 4s because we just don't have enough teachers. That's not sufficient. If you prematurely exit students before they're proficient, especially in the specific language domains of reading and writing. If you fail to monitor the progress of your former EL students, or you fail to exit EL students from ESOL programs after they demonstrate or could have demonstrated if assessed proficiency in English. So you can't hold them in the ESOL program longer than necessary. If they meet the exit criteria, then you need to exit them. It's inappropriate to keep them in the program just so you either have more EL students showing or so you can keep giving them accommodations, etc. Once they meet the exit criteria, they need to be exited. There are guiding questions in the ESOL program guidance document, and they are on pages 53 to 54. Those are questions you can ask as you're developing the plan for how this process occurs in your district. Okay, are there any more questions on this topic?
Well, we do have 2 questions that we didn't get to answer last time.
Okay.
So here is one district. Do we use PARC data to reevaluate students who have been exited from the program? I realized most students did not perform at the proficient level. I have several students scoring 5s on ELPA as in classwork, yet received a 3 on PARC.
I would keep monitoring them for another year to see the 3. I need to answer that later. I need to go look and see what guidance we gave you on that. And we did issue some guidance on how to use PARC data, and I don't remember off the top of my head what we said. So I want to be consistent. I will include that in the follow-up.
Okay. Then here's the other question. If our school uses standards-based report cards, how do we equate a C grade?
You would, whatever is an average score, usually on that, it's if they're proficient or above. A lot of districts use a 1, 2, 3, 4, where a 3 is considered proficient or on meeting standard. That would be a C or above. The 1 and 2 is saying that they're not there yet, and a 4 usually says they're performing above. So generally speaking, it's a 3, but that's an issue we do need to address more specifically when we revise the exit criteria. Okay, you free to go on?
Yep.
Okay. The next topic we're going to address is meaningful communication with LEP parents. And I'm just using the term LEP here because that is how they refer to this group in the OCR documents and in the joint letter, the Dear Colleague letter. School districts and ADE must develop and implement a process for determining whether parents are LEP and evaluate the language needs of LEP parents. And we must provide language assistance to parents or guardians who indicate they require such assistance. We must also ensure that these parents have adequate notice of and meaningful access to information about all school district or SEA programs, services, and activities. We must provide free, qualified language assistance services to these parents. So there are sometimes people will say when they're trying to show why they need to do this, what the legal reasons are for this, help when you're trying to get resources approved to make this happen. So some of it is based on whether you have written or oral providing information, that you have to do it in a language they understand. It's based in Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and related court cases. And Title VI is also cited in a number of government guidance documents, including the Dear Colleague letter that has been used to inform our ESOL program guidance. In the Federal Register, there's a link in the PowerPoint where you can go see the guidance to federal financial assistance recipients regarding Title VI prohibition against national origin discrimination affecting limited English proficient persons. And in that, if you receive any kind of federal financial assistance, basically that document saying that you have to communicate, whatever you communicate to recipients in English, you need to communicate that in the native languages, the language that's most understood by the parent as well. And basically that's what that last saying. Another citation is on August 11th, 2000, the Department of Justice issued what's called LEP guidance. And at the same time, there's an Executive Order 13166, and these are found out the address there. Both of these emphasize the requirements for recipients of federal financial assistance to provide information to LEP parents in the language they can understand. The Executive Order says that each federal agency shall also work to ensure that recipients of federal financial assistance or recipients provide meaningful access to their LEP applicants and beneficiaries. So if you receive any federal funds, in your district, which are any title funds, also funds related to nutrition, any federal funds, then that information that you share with parents needs to not just about those services, but about services you offer. If you expect parents to know it in English, then you need to share it in the other languages. And ESSA, which is the current version of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, has in several places the requirement that parent notifications and information about educational services and programs made available by school districts must be provided to the extent practicable in a language that parents can understand. Some may say, well, why do we need to do this besides the fact that it's a law? Well, the main reason is for parent engagement. There's an English Learner Toolkit that is on OELA's website, the Office of English Language Acquisition, that goes into more about why this is important to do for parent involvement purposes. Chapter 10 of the toolkit specifically addresses this area, and it identifies the research that shows that parent engagement with schools is an indicator of student success. It's actually one of the leading indicators. One thing they point out in there is that providing this communication in a language they can understand provides a foundation for students' academic success. So what is required when we say that you need to have the information available in a language the parent can understand? What the guidance says from the Dear Colleague letter is that we are obligated to meaningfully communicate information related to any program, service, or activity of a school district or SEA that is called to the attention of non-LEP parents. So if it's something that you expect non-LEP parents to know and be informed of, then you need to be communicating that meaningfully to your LEP parents. So which programs, services, or activities are being referenced here? Well, there's an extensive list, but any means any. Here is the list. This is from the January 7th, that Dear Colleague letter, as well as a parent fact sheet that is actually, there's a link there on the PowerPoint. It was issued at the same time as the guidance, and it says what kinds of things should be available. And by the way, that LEP parent fact sheet, I believe, is available in 10 languages in addition to English. And it's something you could distribute at your schools to your parents so they know what to expect. But here are different things that need to be translated or interpreted. Information about your, I'm not going to read all these, but your programs, your procedures, how they register, report cards, handbooks, parent-teacher conferences, information about your GT, IEP, if you have different kinds of schools set up in your district, special education services, discipline policies and procedures. If you're wanting, a field trip permission form or any other permission form, and any other school and program choice options. So here are some processes to put in place to ensure that you're carrying this part of what OCR expects to happen. A process to determine if the parents of English learners are LEP parents. A process to determine the primary language and/or the language parents prefer for communication. A process to identify LEP parents of non-English learners, which is kind of the same thing as that first thing I listed. And a process to identify LEP parents whose language is not common in the district. These can be combined into one process, but it should help you make the distinctions clear about who needs language assistance and who doesn't. Some districts include this on the home language survey about the parents' language preferences for receiving oral and written communications. If You can also provide a cover sheet or a sign with information in less common languages. Gathering this information could be included in the enrollment process. My intent is to provide in the live binder that will be released soon some of those signs and cover sheets that you can provide about less common languages. Then you also should have a process to verify or update this information regularly. While you only administer the home language survey once upon initial enrollment in your district, it's highly recommended that you verify the parent's preferred language of communication on a regular basis, such as once a year. Because as families are here longer, sometimes the parents change their preference and over time no longer want the information in the language they originally communicated, but now they want it in English. So just keep that in mind as you're determining that. In order to document the language preference of guardian or parents, you should enter the preferred language of communication as the guardian language in eSchool. There is a place to do that. This field is also what school districts should use when they're providing data to outside programs designed to either call parents or generate letters based on the preferred language of the parent. So if you have something like ParentLink or a system that communicates with parents, that you can also have a Spanish message go home, or Marshallese, or other Arabic languages, whatever your language needs are there. The field shouldn't be pulling from the student language field. It needs to be pulling from the guardian language field as a rule of thumb, because the student language field is what the student's language other than English that was on their initial home language survey is. When I get to the end of the section about this topic, then I'll address questions about this topic. An important thing to do with the interpretations and translations you provide, it does need to be provided by competent and trained people. Staff or outside resources that you use to provide these translations or interpretations must be able to do these services effectively and competently. They should have the appropriate training and sufficient knowledge in both languages, English and the one they're translating to understand specialized terms or concepts, as well as what is required for the role of an interpreter or translator. And they should be aware of the ethics of translating and or interpreting, as well as the necessity of maintaining confidentiality. So providing training for people who are serving as interpreters and translators is a good practice to have in place, especially if you are using staff within your district, and making sure that those you contract with have provided that, or you provide that training. For example, an interpreter and a translator, they are there just simply to interpret the message, change it from English into the language you're targeting. They're not there to make comments about it. They're not there to advise the parents. They're not there to give their opinion. And as far as the ethics, they are supposed to maintain confidentiality and not go share what they have interpreted outside of that setting. So here's a meaningful communication example. The district captures parents' language needs on a home language survey and stores these data electronically in its student information system. The district analyzes the parent language data to identify the major languages. It translates essential district-level documents into the major languages. It assists schools with translating essential school-level documents into the major languages and other languages as needed. And they store these translated documents in the database that all schools can access electronically. For less common languages, the district ensures that LEP parents are timely notified of the availability of free qualified interpreters who can explain district and school-related information that is communicated in writing to parents. The district also canvasses the language capabilities of its staff, creates a list of staff who are trained and qualified to provide interpreter and/or translation assistance, contracts out for qualified interpreter and translation assistance in languages that are not represented on the list of internal ability, and trains all schools on how to access these services. Part of what I'm compiling for districts are different resources that you may contact to contract for qualified interpreter and translation assistance in languages that you do not have available in your district. There are various ways to do that. One thing that this is pointing out is that, especially in some of your languages where you only have a few students who need that language, you may need to be finding someone who can help interpret or read the information in English and tell them in the target language what that information says. You may not always be able to translate every item in writing, but you need to have someone they can call to talk about that document. AT&T has a language line that can be used for this purpose, and there are some other services that can do that as well. If you have universities near you at all, and a lot of this can be done by phone, you might contact them. Different universities in their foreign language departments may have people who would help with that. You just need to make sure they're well qualified. Some compliance issues that come up in this area of meaningful communication. When you rely on students, siblings, friends, or untrained school staff to translate or interpret for parents, this can be a major finding and can initiate an OCR investigation. That has happened to a district in our state, and they took care of it, and everything's good now, but they learned that they had to use qualified interpreters and translators and have them sign confidentiality agreements. It's very important you don't use students to translate for their parents. Or if you fail to provide translation or an interpreter at an IEP meeting, at parent-teacher conferences, at enrollment or career fairs you offer, or at disciplinary proceedings. Or if you fail to provide information notifying LEP parents about a school's programs, services, and activities in a language the parents can understand, or you fail to identify your LEP parents, if you don't even know what language they prefer. So, summary of this area. The communication with your LEP parents or guardians must be in a language they can understand. Districts must have a process to identify LEP parents and their language needs. And translators and interpreters must be competent, trained, and have knowledge of specialized terms in both languages. There are guiding questions about how to determine how your district will address this on page 64 of the ESOL program guidance document. So are there any questions about this topic?
Well, we have 3 questions, one that's on a different topic, and then there's a 4th one that I would like to ask.
Okay.
The first one that's on a different topic is on the previous discussion. What about students who score fully proficient on MAC 2 or LOS during the initial placement? Would these students have to meet exit criteria?
Okay, currently we don't have common entry criteria. So you need to develop entry criteria for your district. A district may use just the English language proficiency results from your MAC 2 or LOS. However, you need to examine when you initially place a student, was that really sufficient in accurately identifying that they are fluent English proficient? You may need to use supplementary data such as prior grades or test scores to inform your final decision about whether they truly are meeting the exit criteria. So that could become part of your entry criteria, that they need to meet the exit criteria. However, it doesn't have to at this time.
Okay, this second question is one that I'd like to answer because it's specific to ELPA 21. It says, understanding that we must communicate with the parents in a language they understand, can we anticipate assessment score reports from ADE offered in multiple languages? Previously, the ELDA was provided in English with an ADE version in Spanish. Will the same be done for ELPA 21? What about some of the other languages we struggle to find translations or interpreters who can accurately provide those services, for example, Arabic? What is supposed to occur this year is that individual student reports, the ISRs, will be provided in the 5 top languages for Arkansas for this school year. Those are Spanish, Marshallese, Vietnamese, Laotian, and Arabic. Then question number 3 says, understanding that any means any, how do smaller districts understand smaller, how do smaller districts with smaller LEP categorical funds accomplish this communication in the language the parent understands if we do not have personnel who speak, read, or write these languages?
Okay, that's why I'm trying to compile some resources for you to contact about those kinds of communication. A lot of it is finding if you have volunteers in your community who know those languages, and talk to them about their ability and availability to help you with that process, whether it's from universities nearby or even universities that aren't so close, but you can call them and do some things by phone or other electronic means of communication. There are some services you can contract with as well. I do know this is a big concern, and we will look at providing you resources that can help lead you to how to address that. And as an agency, just so you know, we are in the process of making sure that the communications the agency sends out that we expect you to give to parents, whether it's a letter from the commissioner to parents, or it's a letter from the assessment office about ACT Aspire. We're working on a process to make sure ADE is communicating in the common languages, and are working to not have you have to translate all that information, because it is really our responsibility to do so.
Okay, here is a question that's related to the one that I answered, and then we have 2 more. So it says, as far as the ELPA 21 scores are concerned, what about Chinese Mandarin? Chinese Mandarin is not one of the top 5 languages this year. It's actually language number 7 in Arkansas. So the ELPA 21 ISRs won't be provided in Mandarin. Let's see, these 2 questions are kind of related. The issue of ensuring that an outside source is competent presents a challenge, especially when you're working with a language that no one in the district has command of. Just because someone is in higher ed, meaning university, does not necessarily mean that the student is proficient. We're struggling with this issue of being in compliance for those languages we cannot find easily: Arabic, Gujarati, Laotian, or Mongolian. Will you list free resources or address these issues at the state level that can be shared free with us?
I'm going to develop that list as well as we can. I know that it's a challenge, and we're also reaching out to some other states to see how they're addressing this. The biggest thing you need to do is to keep trying and not just dismiss it as a need. We will work together to try to find solutions on that. And part of it will be some of you sharing with each other how you're addressing it as well. Any other questions?
There's one that I would like to ask that I've been asked in different formats over the last year. As far as remuneration for translation and interpretation services, and when I was in higher ed, this was a fairly big issue. Many people who are qualified in second language translation and interpretation will not do it for free. So the question comes from how do districts pay for these services if they don't have money to do it?
Well, most of what OCR will say is that anything related to what you're required to do, you can't use the excuse of you don't have money to do. So you need to be creative with the use of funds. It might be from EL funds, it might be from district funds, it might be from NSLA funds. They could be used as a transfer over to English learner funds. I know that you have to be careful with what you do with Title III funds, and Miguel could answer whether or not you can use any of those funds for translating or not. So it's a complicated situation.
And then here's the second part of that. If you've got school personnel, either administrative or teaching staff, who do have the ability to provide the interpretation or the translation, and what I mean by those, interpretation is spoken and translation is written.
Mm-hmm.
Should those personnel be expected to provide these services for free since it's not actually in their contract?
I think that's a district by district decision. If it's something that some districts I've seen do it as a duty, like you might have recess duty, you might have translation duty. And in that case, it's just a duty that school's determined needs to occur, and you're paid to be there. You can't double pay someone for the amount of time they're contracted. If it's above and beyond their contracted time, then you could be, and probably should be, paying them to provide those services and not just expecting them to do free work outside of work. So if you're allowing them to do it on contracted time, then that's sufficient, but it shouldn't be taking the place of their required planning or their required lunch, free time. You can't be violating things like that in order to have your bilingual staff providing these services. Okay, Miguel, did you have anything to add about using Title III for?
Well, I like to say is that, of course, you do use your state funds and all the other funds that you have available first. And then you can use, Title I money and Title III money. It is permissible for interpretation. But I would start with, the funds that you have available first and then go to the very last. But those funds are available for translators.
Okay, then we have a final comment on the translations, which I, as somebody that has been in foreign languages for quite some time, realize that this is a fairly hot topic in districts. So, like I said, this is more of a comment or a question comment than it needs a response. I don't think it's fair to give us the response that OCR will say we have to figure it out. Knowing that many of us are struggling and working with small pots of money, can the ADE not address this comprehensively or ask us to contribute a small amount or withhold a percentage of our allocations? It is not practical for all of us to do similar translations expending the same monies.
Yes, I'm aware of that concern. I am looking at some translation systems that we could possibly implement to help all districts. So I hear your concern, and we will work on addressing it in a more comprehensive manner. That's one reason I've been working to make sure that documents that ADE sends out that we expect to be given to parents are provided in languages already translated. It shouldn't be up to districts to do that. It makes no sense to have, almost 200 districts having to translate something into Spanish, for example. That's a waste of effort and time. So we need to go ahead and move on to our final topic because we're about out of time. So if there's some questions we don't get to live, then we'll be answering them later. But I want to be respectful of your time. Okay. The next piece is on program evaluation. This is a very important part to help you be in compliance with providing successful English learner programs. You must periodically evaluate your program and modify the program when it does not produce the results that it needs to be producing. Continuing to use an EL program that has a sound educational design, you think that we've got research to back up using it. Well, it's not sufficient to keep using it as you're implementing it if it's not working. Success is measured in terms of whether the particular goals of a district's program are being met without unnecessary segregation, which has been discussed in a previous webinar about segregation. And as previously discussed, your goals need to address these two things. They must address that your English learner students are attaining within a reasonable period of time English proficiency and meaningful participation in the standard educational program comparable to their never English learner peers. OCR, the Department of Justice, and ADE will not view a program as successful unless it meets those two goals. If your program is not effective, you need to make appropriate programmatic changes so that students can reach these goals. Neither school districts nor ADE may exit an English learner student from English learner status or services based on time in the program if the student has yet to achieve English proficiency. So if you have a policy in your district that says we provide services for 3 years, then you're out, that is not acceptable. Meaningful ESOL program evaluations include longitudinal data that compare performance in the core content areas, graduation, dropout, and retention data. And you look at this data by comparing the performance of English learner students in the program and former EL students who exited the program with those of never English learner students to see if you have gaps, if you're progressing at the same rate. You know, as your never EL students are improving, your EL students and former ones should be improving as well. You need to monitor EL students' progress from grade to grade to see if the ESOL program is causing academic content area deficits, and then you need to provide remediation. Whether your students are on track to graduate and have comparable opportunities to their never English learner peers to become college and career ready. Other important indicators of program success include whether the achievement gap between EL students and never EL students is declining over time. There will be a gap, but see if it's declining. Especially see if it's declining between former EL students and never EL students. Then also monitor the degree to which current and former EL students are represented in your advanced classes, special education, GT, and other extracurricular activities relative to their never EL peers. You should have similar percentages of students in each of those categories in those programs. An example here is a district conducting a longitudinal cohort analysis that examines the percentage of beginner level EL students who complete and successfully exit ESOL program services within 4 years, 5 years, and at other intervals. The district also compares the performance of the exited EL students and their never EL peers on the standardized reading, math, science, and social studies tests in the grades shown, as well as their retention in grade, dropout, and graduation rates. The district considers whether it's possible to attribute earlier exits and disparate performance data of exited EL students in the content areas to a specific program design, teacher training, or differences in programming across grade levels. They disaggregate the average rate of EL program exit and the average standardized test performance by program, school, content areas, years in ESOL programs, and grade to monitor which EL programs and services require modification. This is especially beneficial when you offer a variety of services. Another example is that some school districts have updated or modified their existing data systems for the purpose of collecting and analyzing information about English learner and former English learner student data relative to never English learner student data. This data includes standardized tests, district assessments, participation rates in different programs, graduation, dropout, retention. For example, when a district's 4-year longitudinal cohort analysis data revealed higher dropout rates for English learner students and exited English learner students than never EL students, the district revised its grades 6 through 12 ESOL curriculum with the help of its ESOL teachers and mandated more training for secondary sheltered content instructors. Some compliance issues that come up with evaluation. They consider whether you monitor and compare the academic performance of EL students in the program and those who exited relative to never English learner peers, and whether you evaluate ESOL programs over time using accurate data, and then modify your programs when you're not meeting the standards we've talked about. There are guiding questions within the ESOL program guidance document on pages 57 to 60. And these are the areas you probably should be looking at in an evaluation: how you are implementing your program, your student performance information in relation to English language development and academic performance, and how you are analyzing that information and identifying areas for improvement. A plan, I know that we need to address program evaluation in a more comprehensive manner and look for training about that to be coming over the next year. Are there any other questions about this?
Nope, none about this part of the presentation.
Okay. Training coming up. There are regional English language proficiency standards workshop sessions. There are 6 around the state. I know that these are not in every co-op. We could not afford to put them in every co-op. So please attend one that's close to you, or that you can, spend the night and attend. There are 6 locations. Please register on the ESC Works site for all of these. We do look forward to seeing many of you at these trainings so that you can take training back to your districts and schools on how to use the English language proficiency standards in instruction to improve performance of English learner students. Their EL Achieve Symposium is taking place June 1st and 2nd in Springdale, and I have emailed out information. If you want information about that, please email me. And then I am in the process of scheduling ESOL Coordinator 101 sessions throughout the summer and early fall at various educational service cooperatives. At these sessions, we'll be looking at how do you make a district plan based on the guidance that's in the ESOL program guidance that we have provided. As I've said many times and will continue to say, the team that we have here at ADE, myself, Miguel, and Alan, we are here to serve you and help you as you are trying to meet the needs of our English learners out in the field. We do appreciate all the work that you do with our students and look forward to working with you further in the future. So are there any last minute questions, or we have run out of time?
Nothing that's popped up.
Okay. I did see in the chat box, is there an app or something for program evaluation, a template to not have to recreate it in every school? That's part of the training that I know that we need to be addressing as a state and for districts that I'm working on with IDRA or with the CEDL, the Southeast Regional Educational Laboratory. All these acronyms are so hard to keep up with. So I am working on that. I do know that that would be helpful for several districts. Okay. Alan or Miguel, do you have anything to add?
Nothing from me.
Me either.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for participating, and I look forward to seeing you at one of the summer workshops. Please feel free to contact us with any questions that you have, and we'll do our best to help you out. Thank you.